Parish and Neely. Well, here's the deal. Parish has been dreaming, probably praying, and definitely asking all year long for an American Girl doll for Christmas. And on Christmas morning, when it finally came, Parish came downstairs, opened the prettiest present, and there before her was an American Girl doll. Kit, I believe, was her name. And before Parish could even gaze into Kit's eyes, her new best friend, Neely, who was younger and admittedly a little rougher with her voice, grabbed Kit by the hair and body smacked one on the right and one on the left. Bam! I'm not sleeping like it. And there was much weeping and gnashing of teeth. I tell you this story for two reasons. One, I thought it was funny, and I just want to share some of our family Christmas cheer. And then two, today I would like to talk about sharing. Specifically sharing Jesus. Now this is Epiphany Sunday. Now different traditions sort of play out Epiphany Sunday a little bit differently. Ours focuses most of the time on that story of the three wise men that we just read. But it's sort of a weird church calendar event. It's really after Christmas. It's during that part of January when everything's kind of done and people start looking at you funny if your tree is still up. It's that Christmas after party that nobody really knows what to do with. But it's important because the fact is we spent all of Advent and waiting and anticipation and how do we prepare and Jesus is coming and here comes the gift. But sometimes in the church we sort of forget to have the moment where we've opened the gift and celebrated. For Matthew, this good news of Jesus' birth was almost immediately for everyone. Our passage was that We Three Kings story, like I said, where they bring, if I remember correctly from the pageant from a few weeks ago, gold because it's shiny, frankincense because it smells good, and myrrh for sensitive skin. The problem was that for Matthew, these were the very first visitors. Matter of fact, in this scene, they're kind of the lead role. Now, did you see in the passage that silent night, when Jesus was born in our reading? Did you hear it? Let me point it out to you. It's in verse 1, if you want to glance there. Here it comes. Here's the whole nativity scene. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. That was it. It's about 8 words that Jesus' birth gets. Everything else is about these wise men. That was it. The whole nativity scene. And if we widen our scope, it even gets worse, okay? Because this is chapter 2, about 2/3 of chapter 1 is spent on Jesus' genealogy. And then the last third is Joseph deciding whether or not to leave Mary for getting pregnant when he's pretty sure he had nothing to do with that. That's all chapter 1. Then chapter 2, Jesus' birth gets about 8 words. And then the next 12 verses of Matthew launches into the story about the 3 wise men. And tradition assumes they're from Asia, but at least they're from the East, a.k.a. they're not Jewish. And then, time out, by the way, we say wise men, and I know that's tradition, but while I'm on this little rant, a better translation is something more like, magician or astrologer. And no offense to any magicians or astrologers that we have in Kingston today, but I picture like Jafar from Aladdin here. Which is not exactly my understanding of the ones who should get to see Jesus first. So after these Gentiles get to be the one who recognize and celebrate Jesus, the second half of the chapter, chapter 2, is dedicated to the family moving south to Egypt. God comes to Joseph in a dream, says Herod wants to kill Jesus, so you guys better go to Egypt to lay low for a while. So, as a recap, the first 2/3 of the chapter gives Jesus very, very Jewish family line, sort of a who's who of Old Testament characters. You could pretty much name any big Old Testament character, and you read this genealogy, and sure enough, it was Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-grandma. It's just in there. And then after establishing that Jesus is basically a pedigree Jewish royalty, Gentiles from the east, Gentiles from the south. And top it all off, Matthew is this book that finishes with that Great Commission line, Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to do everything that I have commanded you. Remember, I'll be with you till the end of the age. Now imagine with me if Parrish had unwrapped that doll, newly grounded, Parrish screwed, and then Adam and Sarah sat down Parrish and said, now, I recognize that you have been asking for this gift, and I recognize that you're the one who's been waiting for it all year, and I recognize that the gift had your name on it, but now that you've unwrapped it, it's every bit as much Neely's as it is yours. Weeping and gnashing. I just got to share this with you. This is probably a bad decision, but under the influence of, I'm just now finally getting over this cold, and under the influence of cold medicine, I wrote a little rant about how I felt, about how this was backwards, And rather than clean it up later when I wasn't under the influence of cold medicine, I'd like to read that to you now. Now, if I'm one of the Jewish people who've been waiting a few millennia for the Messiah, I'm a little ticked when the Messiah finally lands on earth, and in less than a chapter, all of Asia and Africa have laid claim to him. Isn't there some rule about Jews getting first dibs? I mean, they've been in line the longest. It's not like Jesus got born in Hong Kong or Boston. God dropped him off at a Bethlehem stable. So I'm fine with eventually bringing some of this good news with somebody else. But isn't there some sort of 50-year reward period where Israel gets to hold exclusive Messiah rights before having to share him with everyone else? I don't recommend writing under the influence of cold medicine, but it can make you a little bit more honest. And honestly, that's how I feel. Aren't they the first ones in line? Don't they get a little ownership? Well, for us, as with Matthew's audience, Jesus was never someone we got to keep as our own. Are we all invited to take part of the good news of Jesus Christ as sons and daughters of God? Yes. Does that mean we get to sign gospel ownership papers? No. And thank God. Because let me give you an example. There is this organization. Well, there's this fishing village, okay? In Ghana. Ghana, for those who don't have their African map down, would be on the western, the Atlantic side, and there's this huge lake in Ghana called Lake Volta. Okay? And there are these fishing villages, and here's something that's been going on for years. These sort of fishing bosses will go to rural villages and tell the families, we will teach your sons this great trade of fishing, and we'll educate them, and they'll be well taken care of. And these poor rural villages are thrilled to be able to give their sons like a better future, an education, and a trade. And so they will give these young boys to the fishing bosses who will take them to Lake Volta on these fishing villages and use them as slave labor. Barely feeding, barely educating, slave labor. Now, if I had an organization that was going to fix this problem, if I had a little money or a little power and I came face to face with these fishing bosses, I would punch them in the throat. I just would. That's what I want to do. Like when I heard that story, I was angry. I mean, the story would end like this. If I was telling the story, if I was fixing it, and the fishing bosses of Lake Volta were never seen from again. So, that's how it worked. But it turns out that my mentality is one that thinks I get to own Jesus and own grace. That once I've been given grace, I get to decide who gets the grace, how they get the grace, when they get grace. Never mind that as Christians we are called to be witnesses. And as witnesses, we sit in the witness chair. The one that shares the grace that we've experienced. The one that tells everyone what we've seen from God. We don't sit in the judge's seat. That's a different chair. We do zero deciding as to who gets grace. We just tell everyone about it. Well, here's the deal. Mercy Project finds out about this village, and they go to work with them, and here's what they did. They go and they see what's going on in the village, and they step back and they say, who in this equation is missing out on the freeing grace of Jesus Christ, and who are we called to share that freeing grace with? And do you know what they decided? Everyone was the answer. And so here's what they did. In exchange for the boys' freedom, they go to these fishing bosses and they make a deal with them. They invest in the local fishing industry. That's right, they got something good out of the deal. These bad guys that I wanted to punch, they get something out of the deal. And then they taught these fishing bosses. They said, here's the deal. If you'll exchange for these boys' freedom, we will teach you a better way of fishing. We will give you a little bit better technology so that you won't even need slave labor. You'll actually make more money by freeing these boys and having a more progressive fishing industry. On the final day of the process, they've trained these boys, they've trained these fishing bosses. As these fishing bosses have been given love and grace like they probably have not experienced, they began to turn and share that love and grace with these boys that they have kidnapped, essentially, for slave labor. And on the last day, when it's time for the boys to go back to their homes, these men had dressed them by their own money, dressed these boys in the best clothing they could find, and given them travel money, and sent them home to be reunited with their families and to be educated in school. And on that day, the founder of the Mercy Project asked all the fishing bosses as they stand in front of this former slave laborer, and they say, who of you were initially, when you were young, kidnapped and used as slave labor? And over half of the bosses raised their hands. The men I wanted to punch were simply carrying on the lessons that were taught to them when they were treated as slaves. And the grace of Jesus Christ, that unrestrained, unbounded grace, is the only thing that stops this cycle. This Epiphany, this year, may we allow someone to take the little bit of gospel that we think we own and grab it by the hair and body swing to the right and to the left. And may it land so far outside our understanding of who deserves grace